Hi, I'm Perry Atkinson, General Manager here at theDove. Hey, check out our other videos and check out our website at thedove.us. Welcome back. Well, it's always a delight and an honor to have with us Dr. Gene Getz. He is the editor behind the Life Essential Bible, lebible.com. You can check it out. It's a Bible that it ends up being one of the great resources of our day. It's got QR codes from Genesis to Revelation. And if you have a smartphone or a tablet or whatever, and you can download a free QR reader. Usually most of those app stores have them. You just run that over your one of the QR codes in the Bible here that he has, and up pops Dr. Gene, and he gives you anywhere from a 5 to 10 minute Bible study on that principle. So I consider him a good friend and one of my favorite guests to have. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
Perry, it's always great to be with you, and also kind of encourages me that you believe in this Bible.
Yeah, well, you know, I've given so many away and gotten so many comments, but anyway, it's just terrific. And they can go to lebible.com and get one there, right?
That's right. Or actually, our new website now, BiblePrinciple.org.
Oh,
BiblePrinciples.org.
Thank you for reminding me that.
That's our brand new. Yeah, and that's our brand new website. So I think people would enjoy it.
Thank you. Well, let's do a couple of these, Gene. And you picked a good one today. The mystery of suffering. There's a lot of it going on in the world. You know, one of the questions that we're getting here at theDove is, why is God allowing all this stuff to occur?
Right, and that's a very valid question. And of course, Job, principles in Job growing out of his life really speak to that in a dramatic way.
Well, let's talk about it. Pick us up here you're in Job chapter 21.
That's right, and the principle literally is called the mystery of suffering, and the principle states, when ministering to those who have experienced tragedies, and certainly Job had experienced a tragedy, we must be very cautious in offering explanations, particularly during the normal period of grief. And what you have really in the book of Job is, to a great extent, illustrations of how not to help people. Wow. And if you go back to the previous principle, which I've called showing compassion, and that goes back to the chapter 20, which says, when helping others, we're to be empathetic and compassionate. This opening little paragraph, I think, really says it all in terms of what we're talking about today. Job was sitting in an ash heap. He was infected with boils from head to foot. He had lost everything. He had been judged severely by his friends, scorned by his neighbors, derided by his wife. Curse God and die, she said. Yet Zophar, and that's the guy that sets the stage now for the principle we're looking at in chapter 21, Zophar offered no sympathy, no genuine compassion. Rather, he judged him. And so there's a tremendous illustration here in relationship to the fact that this guy was totally out to lunch. He couldn't identify whatsoever with Job's plight. He's categorizing the reasons why Job's suffering. And we know, of course, the whole story, that Job didn't even know about that. Why was he suffering? And so the principle, I think, that comes out of this, Perry, is that bad things happen to good people. And the other side is that good things happen to bad people. Because Job talks about that. He says, why are some people who don't love God, thriving? And I love God, and we know he did because God said he loved him. Why am I suffering? And he didn't know the answer to that question. And Zophar comes along as if he's an expert and hands out these platitudes or makes him feel guilty. And so I think the principle that comes out of that is, how do we handle these situations? And there's a great lesson here that we need to learn, the mystery of suffering. And boy, we don't have all the answers.
All right, well, let's go back over to chapter 1 and go through a couple of those, Gene, because you have as a pastor, and I certainly get it too. You see people who are going through a tough time. There doesn't seem to be a logical explanation. They love God, they've been faithful, their life seems to be in order, but all of a sudden their life gets upside down. And I've heard some pretty cheap responses.
That's right.
I've heard some responses that were anything but loving. And I've heard some responses that were so spiritualized you kind of wonder, what Bible are they reading?
That's right. That's right. And you know, one of the things that we really need to learn from the book of Job is when you're visiting somebody who's suffering, be very careful never to say, I know how you feel, unless you've absolutely been there, because that person will say, maybe courteously, say nothing, but inside they're saying, you absolutely don't know how I feel. And another thing you have to avoid is, I understand. It's much better to say with that person, I don't understand, because we don't really understand all the reasons, particularly in particular situations. And you know, another interesting thing, Perry, even the book of Job doesn't give us all the answers, because at the end of all of this suffering, God blessed him more than he'd ever been blessed before. And so he, before he entered heaven's gates, figured out really what had happened to him. And he knew nothing about this dialogue between God and Satan, God trusting him to be a righteous man to handle this. And so the point that I'm making here is there's some people who go into eternity never understanding why they're suffering. And they love God. And I can give you illustrations like that again and again and again. You know, people, for example, who have Alzheimer's, they have all these serious problems, and yet they love God with all their heart. Mm-hmm. Now, the point being, and I raise a question here at the end, as I do at the end of these segments for application, when people are suffering in ways that seem unexplainable and unfair. And I've often said to people, by the way, this is not fair. Life is not fair. These situations are not fair. So we need to acknowledge that seem unexplainable, unfair. What's the best way to encourage them? And one of the best ways to encourage people is to just be there and be silent. And by the way, his 3 friends started out that way. They just sat with him and were silent until they got into this arrogant approach to trying to resolve the issue. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense, even though it seems to go against our natural tendency to give an answer or an explanation. We have this insatiable desire that we want to help, so we say something and it ends up being stupid.
That's right. That's right. You know? And I've had to just take a person's hand or put my arm around them and just simply be silent. Just silent. Mm-hmm. I'm here. And even in some cases to say, I don't understand.
How do you help a person?
I don't understand.
How do you help a person who's in one of these seasons of tragedy or misfortune not to feel like they're being judged by God?
Well, I think here is where we need to love on people. I just was sharing just last evening with a group of people that a very special couple are coming back into our presence, having moved away, and she has a serious disease, the beginning of Alzheimer's. And I simply said, we need to love on them. I just talked to the son and say, who they're going to be living with here in Dallas, and he simply said, you know, they need a lot of love, they need a lot of encouragement. And it's not that we're going to talk about her disease, though I think she's accepted that, but we're going to love them. We're going to be there. We're going to just treat them as if everything's the way it was in our relationship. So, I mean, that's just an illustration. It happens that I dealt with it last night with a group of people on how to handle it.
Gene, one other question before we take a break. We have a tendency to avoid grief or to quickly get past it, and yet in grief is healing. I think you see this with Job, don't you?
Yeah, you certainly do. We see it at the end. He was fortunate in that at the end of all of this grief, he saw purpose. But you see, I think one of the greatest lessons that we have comes out of Romans 8:28, and that is, even though we don't know what the purpose is, we can trust God for the purpose, that there is ultimate purpose, and that someday, and for a lot of Christians, they won't understand the ultimate purpose until they're with the Lord. Mm-hmm. They just won't. Now, Job was fortunate that he did, but many, many people go through periods of suffering, never really completely understanding the ultimate purpose until they hear face to face from Jesus, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant."
Beautiful. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back with Dr. Gene Getz, we're going to deal with the subject I think is the #1 emotion today in America, if not the world, and that's the subject of fear. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and always a delight and an honor to have with us Dr. Gene Getz. He's the guy behind the Life Essential Bible, and let me encourage you to check this resource out. I know that some of the bookstores here have them, so you may want to check it over at Evangel or Christian Discount Books, or you can go online, and it's BiblePrinciples.com. Is that right, Gene?
BiblePrinciples.org.
.org. Okay, well, I got to get the organ com thing right. BiblePrinciples.org. And order yourself up one of these Bibles. I'm telling you, and here we are going into the Christmas season. You talk about a great Christmas gift to yourself or to a family member. This thing is terrific. I can't tell you how I fall into bed at night exhausted, and I know I should be reading my Bible, so I just listen to Gene.
Bless your heart. Thank you.
So anyway, by the way, we're going to take on a subject now found in Luke, overcoming fear, and I think if there's anything that could kill faith, it's fear. And with all the calls that we get here, Gene, with people hearing something on the radio or watching it on television that sparks an emotion, you can when you talk to them on the phone, you can pretty much bring it back to they're afraid of something. There's some kind of fear element going on. And as far as I know in my life, the only way I can overcome fear is just get really exhausted where I'm too tired to be afraid. Otherwise, it's pretty much there.
I just love your explanation. I think that would be very helpful to people.
Anyway, help us with this principle.
Well, actually, the subject of fear is huge, has many, many applications. Right. And right here in Luke, it has a special application, and it grows out of Peter's experience. And to really understand it, the fear here is a fear of really trusting God in His call on our life, just give our lives to the Lord and trust Him, to trust that He has the best for us. But specifically, let me just set the stage in terms of how that principle comes from this passage. Peter had met Jesus probably 6 months before up in the Jerusalem area, where Andrew, his brother, introduced him to Jesus. Andrew had become a disciple of John the Baptist. And when Jesus saw Peter for the very first time, he identified him and said, you're Cephas, or you're Simon, son of John, but you're going to be called Peter or Cephas. And in other words, you're going to be a rock. Now, Jesus had never met him before, and so that had an impact. But about 6 months later, Jesus had come back to Galilee, and this is something people don't understand. Jesus had been teaching on the shores of Galilee for a period of time, and the apostles, those that Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, had heard him teach many, many times. And on a particular occasion, Jesus got into Peter's boat. He's still very active. He's probably the CEO of the fishing business that was owned by Zebedee. And so Jesus gets in the boat, and he says, after he'd been teaching, he said, Peter, push out and cast your nets. And Peter got very, very upset. If you got to read between the lines a bit, but it's there. He got very upset and said, Lord, we've done this all night. We caught nothing, but if you say so, I will. And so they go out, and you know the story. I mean, it just is an incredible drought. And Peter falls on his face and said, I'm a sinful man, which is very, very revealing. And that's where Jesus comes into this specific situation and says, look, don't be afraid. Don't be fearful. See, this is a specific kind of fear. And then it says, after that, they left their boats, they left their nets, and followed Jesus. He had probably invited them many times over a period of maybe 6 months, and they were resistant, and Peter probably was the guy that was holding the others back, because it says, after that experience, they left their nets and they followed him. Now, it's very important here, I think, too, Perry, to indicate some people just feel like they left their boats to rot, and but they left that business in the hands of the owner, and that was Zebedee, and probably that was the income they lived on while they were following Jesus. Somebody had to take care of their families. Mm-hmm. So, but the point being, they weren't willing to really trust the Lord in that special calling on their life. Now, in terms of how that applies to you and to me, we don't have that specific kind of calling like the apostles did, but we have a calling from Jesus, follow me. You can trust me. You can trust me with your life. Don't be afraid. Don't be fearful to trust God. He will have the best for you, no matter what that, what that is.
I'm also hearing you say here, Gene, that Jesus used fear to deliver a revelation.
Well, he did. Yeah, and he spoke into Peter's life because Peter felt very embarrassed by his attitude, very humiliated because he had acted up. He had revealed this in front of a large group of people. He was mad at the Lord in a sense. Don't you understand? And we've been out there all night long. What are you asking? Mm-hmm. And when the Lord, as it were, made that final punch with his setting the stage to really say, now, can you trust me? Don't be afraid. Follow me. And that is when Peter and James and John, Andrew made that final decision. Okay, we're going to leave this business and we're going to follow Jesus wherever it takes us. Now, that's unique.
Yeah.
But there's a principle there.
Yeah.
That is to just trust God with his invitation to be completely dedicated to him in all that we do.
Of all the emotions, Jesus has the fear nots. I'm sure you've probably done a small little rendition of that, but there's a lot of fear nots in the Bible, so obviously it's an emotion that's quite prevalent.
Oh, it is, and it's just part of being human, and that's why I said at the beginning of our chat that there are many kinds of fear and applications of fear. This happens to be probably one of the most basic fears that some Christians face when they hear Romans 12:1 and 2, to present their bodies to the Lord a living sacrifice, to be conformed to his image, not to the world, and to trust him that that his will is good. Mm-hmm. It's perfect. And you can trust God with your life and with all that you have and all you are. He's not asking me to leave my boats and nets. I've never been a fisherman. That's not my business. Yeah. But what he is saying, Jane, follow me. No matter what you do, follow me. You can trust me. Don't be afraid.
Is fear a lack of faith?
Yeah, perfect love casts out fear. Mm-hmm. That comes to me. Perfect faith casts out fear. Maybe we could say that. I don't know if there's any reference to that.
Yeah.
But I think fear can come even in the midst of faith. I think if we say to a person who's fearful, you don't have enough faith, I think that can be pretty insensitive.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, there are certain instances maybe we could say we need to trust God more, but be very, very careful how you judge a person and say you don't have enough faith, because that can put a person on a guilt trip that won't quit.
Oh, yeah. And yet fear is an emotion created by God, so it has a good element to it.
Absolutely. No question.
How do you've done, as a pastor, you've done enough counseling. Some people really are entrapped with it. I mean, they just can't, they're afraid of everything. They're shadow almost.
That's right.
And yet they're believers. So where do you crack the door here?
Well, I would put it in the same category, making a big jump, but a connection is there are some people who live with pain all their life. You say, what's wrong with you? Now, the fact is that pain or fear can be an element of pain,
right,
of anxiety, and it can be related to our physical bodies. It can be related to hormones. It can be related to levels of what's in our body. I'm looking for a word, serotonin, for example.
Right.
And lacking that can cause a person to have anxiety and fear. And it needs to be dealt with even at a medical level. And so if you say to a person who's just struggling with that kind of anxiety that's generated because of physical illness and trauma and those things, if we say you're just not trusting God enough, you see how that could complicate their illness. There's that dimension. Now, realize, different problems originate in different focus parts of our body, like our body or our psychic, or it could be spiritual. Maybe I am not trusting God enough. But I have to discern when I'm counseling someone, where's the focus of that problem?
Yeah.
Is it spiritual, psychological, or is it physical, or a combination? And God can give us wisdom in handling that.
All right, in about a minute or so, let's get back to the core of the principle here. Don't let fear keep you from obeying. I mean, that is the principle you're trying to convey here, right?
That's right. And obeying, I would go back to the commands of Scripture. I've never met an individual personally where Jesus has said, leave your boats and follow me.
Yeah.
But I meet people all over where Jesus said, trust me, present your body to me, follow me, conform your life to me, trust that I have the best for you.
Wow.
See, those are the commands for us today.
Well, Gene, you're a delight as always, and let me just say to our viewers and listeners, BiblePrinciples.org is the website, and check out the Life Essential Bible. Look for it there or at the bookstores here in our area. But you talk about a wonderful resource for you personally, or maybe as a gift coming up this holiday season. Get one right away, BiblePrinciples.org. Gene, thank you, my friend. I consider it an honor every time you're on, and look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, great privilege, and God bless.
All right, God bless. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.